Japanese pilots met the P-51 Mustang in 1945, and they were shocked by America's long-range fighters appearing where none should exist. March 7, 1945, 25,000 feet above Tokyo Bay. Captain Hiroshi Takeda scans the horizon from his Mitsubishi Zero, confident that no American escort fighter possesses the range to reach Japan's homeland. The mathematics seem impossible. Finding 500 miles from the nearest Allied base to Tokyo and back, his Zero, designed for island defense, can barely manage 1,100 miles total range. Then, silver specks appear on the horizon, growing larger. P-51 Mustangs, escorting B-29 bombers deep into Japanese airspace. Hiroshi's hands shake on the controls as he realizes the implications. If American fighters can reach Tokyo, then nowhere in the empire remains safe. The sky that once belonged to Japan now crawls with enemy aircraft carrying enough fuel to loiter for 30 minutes over the capital itself. How did American industry achieve the impossible? What secret weapon turned the tide of the Pacific air? Or, before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun reflects off Captain Hiroshi Takeda's canopy as his Mitsubishi A6M Zero cuts through the crystalline air above the Pacific. At 25,000 feet, the world spreads beneath him like a vast blue canvas, unmarked by the scars of war. His leather gloves grip the control stick with practiced confidence. The engine's steady vibration, a familiar companion after 3 years of aerial combat. Hiroshi adjusts his goggles and scans the horizon methodically, left to right, the way his instructors at Kasumigara Naval Air Base taught him. The technique had served him well through dozens of sorties, first at Pearl Harbor, then Midway, and now defending the sacred homeland itself. His Zero responds to every subtle input, a perfect marriage of pilot and machine that embodied the warrior spirit of Imperial Japan. The fuel gauge shows 3/4 full, enough for another 90 minutes of patrol. Hiroshi mentally calculates the numbers that have defined his war: 1,100 miles maximum range, 331 miles per hour at cruise, 565 rounds of 20mm cannon ammunition. These specifications represent the pinnacle of Japanese engineering, a fighter designed for the quick, decisive battles that would secure the Pacific for the Emperor. But shortages plague even the elite squadrons now. Aviation fuel arrives in smaller quantities each month, forcing commanders to ration sorties carefully. Spare parts come from salvaged wrecks rather than factory production lines. The Zero beneath Hiroshi lacks the self-sealing fuel tanks of newer designs, a weight-saving measure that now seems ominous as American .50 caliber rounds tear through. Japanese aircraft with devastating efficiency. Radio static crackles through his headset, fragmentary reports from other patrol sectors. Contrails bearing 270 high-altitude formations, estimated 40-plus bogies. The voices carry an edge of tension that Hiroshi recognizes, the sound of pilots confronting something unexpected, something that challenges their fundamental assumptions about aerial warfare. Hiroshi banks left, following a heading that will intercept the reported formations. His mind processes the tactical situation with mechanical precision. American B-29 bombers have been striking Japanese cities for months, flying at altitudes that push defending fighters to their operational limits. But those raids come unescorted, the bombers relying on speed, altitude, and defensive firepower to survive the gauntlet of Japanese interceptors. The mathematics of escort missions seem to favor Japan. No American fighter possesses sufficient range to accompany bombers from distant bases to Tokyo and return safely. The nearest Allied airfields lie over 1,500 miles away, far beyond the combat radius of any known escort fighter. This geographic reality provides Japan's final defensive advantage, forcing American bombers to fight alone above the homeland. Squinting against the sun's glare, Hiroshi detects movement on the horizon. Tiny specks resolve into definite shapes. As he adjusts his approach angle, B-29 superfortresses fly in their characteristic box formations, silver fuselages gleaming like schools of airborne fish. He counts 24 bombers arranged in defensive clusters, their synchronized movements suggesting veteran crews flying precision formations, but something disrupts the familiar pattern. Smaller shapes dart around the bombers' flanks, silver, fighters that bank and weave with predatory grace. Hiroshi blinks hard, certain his eyes deceive him. American escort fighters at this distance from any Allied base represent an impossibility, a violation of every range calculation, every fuel consumption chart, every strategic assumption that underlies Japanese defensive planning. His radio crackles with urgent transmissions from other pilots. Silver fighters, bearing 090, configuration unknown. The voices carry disbelief, confusion, and dawning alarm as the impossible becomes undeniable reality. American escort fighters circle above Tokyo like protective angels, their presence rewriting the fundamental equations of Pacific air warfare. Hiroshi pushes his throttle forward, the Nakajima Sakai engine responding with increased power that presses him deeper into his seat. The Zero accelerates toward the bomber formation, but doubt gnaws at his confidence. If American fighters can reach Tokyo with fuel remaining for combat, then Japan's geographic isolation, its most reliable defensive asset, has vanished overnight. Lieutenant Jack Red Dawson tugs on his leather gloves, the familiar ritual grounding him before each mission. Through the plexiglass canopy of his P-51D Mustang, he sees the muddy airstrip of Iwo Jima stretching toward the Pacific horizon. The volcanic island bears little resemblance to the wheat fields of Kansas that shaped his childhood, but the sky above remains constant, an endless blue cathedral that calls to every pilot's soul. Red's hands move across the cockpit with practiced efficiency, checking switches, gauges, and controls that have become extensions of his own nervous system. The Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin V1657 engine idles with barely contained power, 1,695 horsepower, waiting to transform mechanical energy into aerial supremacy. At 437 miles per hour, maximum speed and a service ceiling of 41,900 feet, the Yaos Mustang represents American industrial capability refined into its most lethal form. The transformation from Kansas farm boy to Army Air Forces pilot began 18 months ago in the sprawling training facilities of Texas and Arizona. Red learned to think in 3 dimensions, to calculate intercept courses while pulling 6 Gs in vertical climbs, to squeeze triggers that unleash 6 .50 caliber Browning machine guns capable of destroying any aircraft in the sky. The training pipeline processed thousands of young Americans, converting agricultural workers and factory hands into aerial warriors with devastating efficiency. But the Mustang's true revolution lies not in its performance alone, but in the marriage of American airframe design with British engine technology. The North American aviation P-51 struggled with mediocre performance until engineers replaced the original Allison engine with the supercharged Merlin power plant. The resulting aircraft combined long-range capability with fighter performance, solving the strategic puzzle that had stymied Allied planners for years. Red studies the mission briefing clipped to his knee board, memorizing target coordinates, rally points, and emergency procedures. Today's assignment represents the culmination of months of planning and preparation. Escort B-29 bombers from Iwo Jima to Tokyo and back, a round-trip distance that pushes the Mustang to its operational limits. External drop tanks carry an additional 110 gallons of fuel, extending the fighter's range to over 1,600 miles, and enabling missions that Japanese strategists consider impossible. The radio crackles with final instructions from Mission Control, coordinating the departure of 68 P-51 Mustangs and 47 B-29 superfortresses. Red visualizes the formation taking shape above the island, bombers climbing to altitude while fighters weave protective patterns around their flanks. The sight would represent American industrial might made manifest, hundreds of aircraft produced by factories that operate around the clock to maintain the pipeline of war material flowing across the Pacific. Ground crews remove chocks from the Mustang's landing gear, signaling clearance for taxi and takeoff. Red acknowledges with a thumbs up, then advances the throttle to begin his roll toward the runway threshold. The Merlin engine's note changes from idle to purposeful growl, propeller blades biting into the thin island air with increasing authority. Red thinks of the factory workers in Detroit and Los Angeles, the engineers in California and Ohio, the countless Americans whose labor created the aircraft that will carry freedom across the Pacific. Each rivet, each weld, each precisely machined component represents democracy's answer to totalitarian aggression. The Mustang embodies American values translated into aluminum and steel. Individual liberty armed with collective industrial power. The control tower clears red for takeoff, and he aligns his aircraft with the runway centerline. Full throttle brings the Merlin to life with thunderous authority, exhaust flames dancing behind the spinner as the propeller pulls the Mustang forward with gathering momentum. The aircraft lifts off smoothly, gear retracting into wells, as Red climbs toward his assigned altitude and position in the formation. Below, Iwo Jima shrinks to a dark speck against the endless Pacific, while ahead lies the 650-mile flight to Tokyo Bay. Red checks his watch, calculates fuel consumption, and settles into the cruise configuration that will carry him deep into enemy airspace. The Mustang flies like an extension of his will, responsive and eager, carrying not just ordnance, but the hopes of a nation determined to end tyranny's reach across the Pacific. The rivet gun chatters in Sarah Whitman's hands as she secures aluminum panels to the wing structure of another P-51 Mustang. The Willow Run plant thunders with the sound of democracy at work. 12,000 workers manning assembly lines that operate 24 hours daily, 7 days weekly, transforming raw materials into instruments of victory. Under the harsh glare of industrial lighting, Sarah's station represents one link in a chain that stretches from Michigan steel mills to Pacific combat zones. Swing music plays from speakers mounted throughout the cavernous factory floor. Benny Goodman's clarinet, weaving between the metallic percussion of pneumatic tools and stamping presses. Sarah moves to the rhythm unconsciously, her hands positioning rivets with precision, born of 18 months' experience, building fighters for pilots she will never meet. Each rivet secures not just metal to metal, but American resolve to the cause of global freedom. The wing section before Sarah will soon carry 50 caliber Browning machine guns, ammunition boxes, and fuel tanks across thousands of miles of hostile airspace. She knows the specifications by heart now. 1,695 horsepower Packard Merlin engine, 437 miles per hour, maximum speed, 6 machine guns firing 850 rounds per minute each. These numbers represent more than technical achievement. They embody American industrial democracy's response to fascist militarism. During her lunch break, Sarah often walks through the final assembly area where completed Mustangs await flight testing. The sight never fails to inspire. Dozens of silver fighters arranged in perfect rows, each aircraft representing 15,000 man-hours of labor and $50,000 in materials and components. Multiply by 15,875 total P-51s produced, and the scale becomes almost incomprehensible. $250 million invested in a single fighter design. The contrast with enemy production capabilities staggers even experienced factory supervisors. Intelligence reports indicate that Japan's entire aircraft industry produces fewer fighters monthly than Willow Run completes weekly. American abundance in raw materials, manufacturing equipment, and skilled labor creates advantages that no amount of martial tradition can overcome. Democracy's diffuse productive capacity proves more decisive than centralized military planning. Sarah's supervisor approaches with the latest production figures: 650 aircraft completed this month, exceeding quotas despite material shortages and workforce turnover. The numbers flow into broader statistics that define America's industrial supremacy. 300,000 aircraft produced since Pearl Harbor, including 96 Thunder 18 fighters designed to establish air superiority over any battlefield. Each aircraft carries the cumulative expertise of designers, engineers, and workers who transform abstract concepts into lethal reality. The radio mounted above Sarah's workstation broadcasts the latest news from the Pacific Theater. B-29 bombers strike Japanese cities with increasing frequency, their missions protected by long-range escort fighters that few believed possible just months earlier. Sarah feels personal connection to these reports, knowing that wings built by her hands now slice through Asian skies, carrying American pilots toward victory. Between rivets, Sarah reflects on the transformation that war has brought to American society. Women comprise 40% of Willow Run's workforce, operating machinery and performing tasks previously reserved for men. The exigencies of total war shatter social conventions while revealing capabilities that peacetime never demanded. Democracy proves its strength not through military pageantry, but through the quiet competence of citizens contributing their skills to collective defense. Quality control inspectors examined Sarah's work with practiced eyes, checking rivet placement, joint integrity, and surface finish against engineering specifications. Military contracts demand perfection. Lives depend on each connection holding under combat stress. The inspection process embodies American manufacturing philosophy: measure twice, build once, deliver weapons that function flawlessly under the worst possible conditions. As her shift nears its end, Sarah wipes perspiration from her brow and contemplates the wing section she has completed. Tomorrow, this component will join fuselage, engine, and countless other parts to create another instrument of American aerial supremacy. The pilot who eventually flies this aircraft will inherit not just machine, but the collective labor of thousands of workers united in common cause. The factory whistle signals shift change, and Sarah gathers her tools before heading toward the exit. Behind her, the night shift takes position at workstations that never stop producing. Willow Run operates as a mechanical heartbeat of democracy, pumping aircraft into the global bloodstream 24 hours daily. Each completed fighter carries a piece of Michigan with it, industrial muscle translated into aerial dominance over distant battlefields. 12-year-old Yuki Sato stands in the schoolyard of her Tokyo elementary school, geometry textbook pressed against her chest as she stares upward at the morning sky. White contrails etch parallel lines across the blue expanse, their formation too precise and numerous to represent anything familiar or benign. The distant thunder of aircraft engines builds steadily, a mechanical symphony that grows louder with each passing moment. Her classmates gather around her, pointing and chattering with the mixture of excitement and apprehension that characterizes children confronting the incomprehensible. For months, air raid sirens have wailed across Tokyo as American B-29 bombers strike industrial targets and residential areas with increasing frequency. But those raids typically occur at night, the bombers flying alone through darkness, while searchlights probe unsuccessfully for targets moving at 30,000 feet altitude. This formation appears different. The contrails maintain perfect spacing and alignment, suggesting bomber aircraft flying in defensive box formations designed to concentrate firepower against attacking fighters. But smaller contrails weave around the larger ones, creating patterns that Yuki's limited understanding of aerial warfare cannot immediately comprehend. The sight triggers intuitive alarm. Something fundamental has changed in the sky above Japan. Yuki's teacher, Mrs. Yamamoto, emerges from the school building with a hand shading her eyes against the morning sun. Her expression shifts from curiosity to concern as she processes the implications of what appears overhead. For American bombers to fly in daylight suggests either desperate circumstances or overwhelming confidence. The presence of escort fighters implies the latter, a demonstration of aerial supremacy that renders Japanese airspace as vulnerable as any other battlefield. The mathematical impossibility of the scene confounds even adult understanding. Tokyo lies over 2,500 miles from the nearest Allied airfield, a distance that exceeds the combat radius of any known American fighter. Japanese military planners have structured their defensive strategy around this geographic advantage, confident that bombers forced to attack alone remain vulnerable to coordinated interception. The sight of escort fighters above the capital shatters fundamental assumptions about Pacific warfare. Radio broadcasts have reported mysterious long-range raids from captured Pacific islands, but official propaganda dismisses American claims as exaggeration designed to undermine civilian morale. The evidence overhead contradicts every reassuring statement from government sources. If American fighters can escort bombers to Tokyo and return safely, then nowhere in the Japanese Empire remains beyond enemy reach. Yuki counts the contrails methodically, her mathematical training providing structure for processing overwhelming information. 24 heavy bomber contrails maintain formation discipline, while at least 40 smaller trails weave protective patterns around them. The escort fighters move with predatory grace, their maneuvers suggesting pilots confident in their aircraft's performance and fuel reserves. The formation passes directly overhead, engines creating a continuous rumble that seems to shake the Earth itself. Yuki glimpses individual aircraft through breaks in the contrail pattern, silver bombers maintaining precise spacing while sleek fighters patrol their flanks like aerial destroyers screening a naval task force. The sight represents American industrial capability made manifest. Hundreds of aircraft operating thousands of miles from their bases with apparent impunity. Mrs. Yamamoto begins herding students toward the school's air raid shelter, but Yuki remains transfixed by the spectacle overhead. The escort fighters appear to loiter above Tokyo, their presence suggesting fuel reserves sufficient for extended combat operations. This capability transforms the strategic equation completely. American bombers no longer fight alone against Japanese interceptors, but operate under protective umbrella that follows them throughout their missions. Fear spreads through the civilian population as word of the daylight raid circulates throughout the city. If American forces can mount escorted bomber attacks on Tokyo in broad daylight, then Japanese military claims of homeland security collapse into propaganda and wishful thinking. The psychological impact equals the physical destruction. Citizens, realizing that their government cannot protect them from enemies operating with apparent immunity above their capital. As the formation disappears toward industrial targets in southern Tokyo, Yuki finally allows her teacher to guide her toward shelter. But the image burns in her memory, American aircraft flying over Japan as though the Pacific Ocean presented no obstacle to their operations. The sky that once belonged exclusively to Japanese pilots now hosts enemy formations that arrive and depart according to their own schedule, immune from effective interception. Captain Hiroshi Takeda pushes his Zero into a shallow dive, targeting the nearest B-29 super fortress as it approaches Tokyo from the southeast. The massive bomber appears vulnerable, 4 engines, high altitude, loaded with fuel and ordnance that should make it sluggish and defenseless against a nimble interceptor. Hiroshi's 6 months of combat experience against unescorted bombers suggests this attack will follow familiar patterns close to optimal firing range, engage with 20mm cannon, then break away before defensive gunners can establish tracking solutions. But a silver streak cuts across his flight path with shocking speed, forcing Hiroshi to break off his attack run and dive away from immediate danger. A P-51 Mustang banks hard left, its wings catching sunlight, as the pilot maneuvers for firing position. Hiroshi's mind struggles to process the impossible sight, an American single-engine fighter operating over Tokyo, 1,500 miles from the nearest Allied airfield. The Mustang's performance characteristics become immediately apparent as it climbs after Hiroshi's diving Zero, where his aircraft achieves maximum speed of 331 miles per hour. The American fighter demonstrates capability exceeding 430 miles per hour in level flight. The Mustang's rate of climb matches or exceeds the Zero's despite carrying external fuel tanks and heavier armament. Hiroshi realizes with growing alarm that his tactical advantages have evaporated overnight. Banking sharply right, Hiroshi attempts to exploit his Zero's legendary maneuverability in a tight horizontal turn that should allow him to reverse positions with the pursuing Mustang. The Japanese fighter responds beautifully, its low-wing loading and light construction, enabling turn rates that have dominated Pacific air combat for 3 years. But the American pilot refuses to engage in the turning fight that favors Hiroshi's aircraft, instead maintaining energy and speed while positioning for a high-speed gunnery pass. The Mustang's armament creates another dimension of tactical disadvantage. Where Hiroshi's Zero carries two 20mm cannon with limited ammunition, the American fighter mounts 6 .50 caliber Browning machine guns with 880 rounds total capacity. The Brownings fire at 850 rounds per minute each, creating a cone of destruction that reaches effectively to 1,000 yards. Hiroshi must close to within 200 yards for his cannon to achieve similar hitting power. Tracer round streak past Hiroshi's canopy as the Mustang pilot opens fire during a high-speed pass. The 50 caliber bullets tear through the air with devastating kinetic energy, each round capable of penetrating armor plate or igniting fuel tanks. Hiroshi's Zero lacks self-sealing tanks or significant armor protection, weight-saving measures that provided agility at the cost of survivability. American gunnery doctrine emphasizes volume of fire over precision, creating kill probabilities that favor the better-armed fighter. Rolling inverted, Hiroshi dives toward cloud cover, while the Mustang pilot maneuvers for another attack run. The American aircraft demonstrates dive performance that equals or exceeds the Zero's capabilities, maintaining pursuit despite Hiroshi's desperate evasive maneuvers. Speed becomes the decisive factor. The Mustang's powerful Merlin engine provides performance reserves that the Zero's lighter power plant cannot match. Leveling off just above the cloud deck, Hiroshi attempts to escape through violent maneuvering that exploits his fighter's agility advantage. But the Mustang pilot demonstrates tactical sophistication that negates traditional Japanese advantages. Instead of following Hiroshi through tight turns that favor the Zero, the American maintains energy and positioning while waiting for opportunities to engage on favorable terms. The psychological impact proves as significant as the tactical disadvantage. For 3 years, Hiroshi has dominated aerial combat through superior training, aircraft design, and tactical doctrine. Japanese pilots entered the war with 800 hours of flight training compared to Americans' 200 hours, while the Zero outperformed every Allied fighter in the Pacific theater. Those advantages sustained Japanese aerial supremacy through 1942 and into 1943, but American industrial capacity has produced both superior aircraft and better-trained pilots. Intelligence reports indicate that new American pilots arrive with 240 hours of training compared to Japanese pilots' 40 hours, due to fuel shortages and accelerated production schedules. The Mustang represents technological superiority, while its pilot embodies systematic training advantages that reverse the experience differential. Hiroshi's canopy suddenly fills with tracer fire as the Mustang pilot achieves firing position during another high-speed pass. Cannon shells and machine gun bullets tear through the Zero's lightly built airframe, severing control cables and puncturing fuel tanks. Smoke streams from the engine compartment as Hiroshi fights to maintain control of his mortally wounded aircraft. Emergency procedures take over as Hiroshi prepares for forced landing or bailout, but his mind remains focused on the tactical revolution he has witnessed. American escort fighters operating over Tokyo with fuel reserves sufficient for extended combat. The geographic advantage that protected Japan has vanished, replaced by American industrial capability that renders distance irrelevant. Dawn breaks across Iwo Jima's volcanic landscape as ground crews wheel 110-gallon drop tanks toward waiting P-51 Mustangs. The external fuel containers represent the technological breakthrough that revolutionized Pacific air warfare. A simple solution to the complex problem of extending fighter range beyond geographical limitations. Each cylindrical tank carries enough fuel to increase the Mustang's operational radius by 350 miles, transforming a capable interceptor into a long-range escort fighter. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez supervises the installation process, ensuring proper alignment of mounting, brackets, and fuel line connections. The drop tanks attach beneath each wing through mechanical latches designed for jettisoning during combat, allowing pilots to shed the additional weight and drag when maneuverability becomes paramount. This capability enables Mustangs to fly extended ferry missions while retaining full fighter performance over the target area. Lieutenant Red Dawson approaches his aircraft as crew chiefs complete final preparations. The P-51D carries internal fuel capacity of 269 gallons in wing and fuselage tanks, sufficient for approximately 950 miles range at cruise settings. Adding two 110-gallon external tanks extends total fuel load to 489 gallons, enabling missions that reach 1,600 miles from base and return safely. The mathematics transform strategic possibilities overnight. Red performs his pre-flight inspection methodically, checking control surface movement, tire pressure, and engine oil levels. The Packard Merlin power plant will consume approximately 80 gallons per hour during cruise flight, requiring careful fuel management during extended missions. Navigation and power setting calculations determine mission success. Too much power consumption early in the flight leaves insufficient reserves for combat and return, while excessive conservation reduces effectiveness over the target area. The mission briefing emphasizes fuel management procedures that maximize escort effectiveness while ensuring safe return to base. Mustangs will climb to altitude using internal fuel only, reserving external tanks for the long cruise to Japan. Drop tanks will be jettisoned before entering combat, allowing maximum performance during engagement with enemy fighters. Internal fuel must sustain combat operations and return flight across 650 miles of Pacific Ocean. Japanese intelligence services struggle to comprehend the technological and tactical breakthrough that external fuel tanks represent. Traditional fighter design emphasized performance over range, accepting limited operational radius as an unavoidable compromise. The concept of jettisoning additional fuel capacity during combat challenges fundamental assumptions about aircraft design and military doctrine. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Ground crews complete final checks and remove safety pins from armament systems. Red's Mustang carries standard loadout of 650 caliber Browning machine guns with 1,880 rounds total ammunition, sufficient for approximately 14 seconds of continuous fire. The firepower concentration exceeds most enemy fighters while maintaining accuracy out to 1,000 yards effective range. Combined with superior performance, the armament package creates overwhelming tactical advantages. Radio checks confirm communication with other squadron aircraft as the formation prepares for takeoff. 68 P-51 Mustangs will escort 47 B-29 Super Fortresses on today's mission to Tokyo, demonstrating American capability to project air power across previously insurmountable distances. The sight would represent industrial democracy's triumph over geographical isolation and totalitarian military tradition. Mechanics step away from aircraft as pilots complete startup procedures and prepare for taxi. The Merlin engines settle into synchronized idle exhaust flames dancing behind propeller spinners as power plants warm to operating temperature. Drop tanks create additional weight and drag that affects takeoff performance, requiring longer runways and modified power settings during initial climb. Red advances throttle smoothly, feeling the Mustang respond despite additional fuel load that increases gross weight by 1,500 pounds. The external tanks will burn down during the flight to Japan, gradually reducing weight and improving performance as fuel consumption progresses. By the time combat begins over Tokyo, the aircraft will handle normally after jettisoning empty external containers. The technological innovation of drop tanks exemplifies American problem-solving methodology applied to military challenges. Instead of accepting range limitations as immutable constraints, engineers developed practical solutions that extended capabilities without compromising performance. The external fuel concept spread throughout American fighter aviation, enabling escort missions that Japanese planners considered impossible. Control Tower clears the formation for takeoff as B-29 bombers begin their departure sequence from parallel runways. The sight of 68 fighters and 47 bombers taking off simultaneously represents American industrial capacity translated into aerial supremacy. Each aircraft embodies thousands of hours of labor, millions of dollars in materials, and decades of technological development focused on projecting democratic values across global distances. Red aligns with the runway centerline and pushes throttle to takeoff power. The Merlin engine responds with thunderous authority, propeller blades biting into morning air as the heavily loaded Mustang accelerates toward rotation speed. External tanks create minor handling changes, but the fundamental aircraft remains responsive and eager to climb toward its assigned altitude and heading. Black smoke rises from Chofu Airfield as P-51 Mustangs complete another devastating strafing. Attack on Japanese fighter installations. The systematic destruction of airfields, aircraft, and support facilities demonstrates American tactical evolution from defensive escort missions to offensive air superiority campaigns. Where Japanese pilots once enjoyed the advantage of fighting from prepared positions near their bases, they now face enemies that appear overhead with devastating regularity. Captain Hiroshi Takeda surveys the wreckage from his sandbagged command post, counting the burned hulks of Zero fighters that never reached operational altitude. 12 aircraft destroyed on the ground represent more than material loss. They embody Japan's diminishing ability to replace equipment and personnel at rates that match American production and training pipelines. The arithmetic of attrition now favors attackers with overwhelming industrial capacity. Squadron strength reports paint an increasingly grim picture of Japanese air defense capabilities. Where Hiroshi's unit began the year with 36 operational fighters, current roster shows 14 aircraft available for combat operations. Pilot losses exceed replacement rates by 3-to-1 ratios, while aircraft attrition outpaces production by similar margins. American estimates suggest Japan loses approximately 1,000 aircraft monthly while producing fewer than 500 replacements. The psychological impact proves equally significant as material destruction. Japanese pilots who once dominated Pacific skies through superior training and equipment now face opponents flying aircraft that exceed Zero performance in every measurable category. P-51 Mustangs demonstrate speed advantages of 100+ miles per hour, climb rates that match or exceed Japanese fighters, and firepower that destroys targets with brutal efficiency. Lieutenant Red Dawson leads his flight of Mustangs in a climbing turn away from the smoking airfield. Mission accomplished with minimal opposition. The absence of effective resistance reflects Japanese air power's systematic degradation over months of sustained American attacks. Where previous raids encountered coordinated interception by experienced pilots flying capable aircraft, current missions face scattered opposition from undertrained aviators in maintenance-deferred fighters. Training disparities compound equipment disadvantages as Japan's pilot production pipeline collapses under fuel shortages and accelerated schedules. New Japanese pilots enter combat with approximately 40 hours total flight time compared to American averages exceeding 240 hours. The experience differential creates kill ratios that favor American pilots by margins approaching 20-1 in some engagements. Radio transmissions from other flights report similar results across the Tokyo metropolitan area. Airfields destroyed, aircraft burned, fuel dumps ignited, maintenance facilities bombed. The coordinated attacks represent doctrinal evolution that transforms escort fighters into offensive weapons capable of achieving air superiority through systematic destruction of enemy capabilities on the ground. Hiroshi watches helplessly as another formation of B-29 bombers approaches Tokyo from the east, escorted by protective screens of Mustangs that patrol confidently above Japanese territory. The sight represents complete reversal of strategic initiative, American forces operating with apparent immunity, while Japanese defenders struggle to mount effective resistance. Air superiority enables subsequent operations that expand American advantages geometrically. Fuel shortages force Japanese commanders to husband remaining resources for critical defensive missions, limiting training flights and routine patrols that maintain pilot proficiency. American raids encounter minimal opposition because Japan lacks sufficient fuel to launch large-scale interceptor missions. The economic warfare conducted by submarine attacks on tankers creates cascading effects that multiply tactical disadvantages. Production. Statistics reveal the magnitude of American industrial superiority in stark numerical terms. United States aircraft factories completed 96,318 fighters during 1944, while Japan produced fewer than 8,000 total combat aircraft. The 10-1 production advantage enables American forces to absorb losses that would cripple Japanese operations, while maintaining offensive pressure that prevents enemy recovery. Quality control problems plague Japanese aircraft production as experienced workers join military units or transfer to higher priority industries. Manufacturing defects increase while performance standards decline, creating aircraft that fail at higher rates and require additional maintenance hours. American fighters benefit from rigorous quality assurance programs that ensure reliability. Under combat conditions, maintenance capabilities deteriorate as spare parts shortages force cannibalization of damaged aircraft to keep remaining fighters operational. Hiroshi's squadron operates with makeshift repairs using salvaged components, while American units receive factory-fresh replacement parts through logistics pipelines that span the Pacific Ocean. Industrial capacity determines operational readiness as much as pilot skill or tactical doctrine. The strategic situation demonstrates how sustained attrition warfare favors opponents with superior replacement capabilities. Japan entered the conflict with approximately 3,000 operational combat aircraft and 15,000 trained pilots. Current estimates suggest fewer than 1,000 aircraft remain operational, while pilot reserves have been exhausted through unsustainable loss. Rates. American forces continue expanding while Japanese capabilities contract toward operational irrelevance. As evening approaches, Hiroshi counts the empty bunks in his squadron's quarters, silent testimony to comrades lost in battles against overwhelming odds. Each absent pilot represents months of training and years of experience that Japan cannot replace. The human cost of attrition warfare extends beyond individual tragedy to encompass the systematic destruction of institutional knowledge and tactical expertise accumulated over decades of military aviation development. Sarah Whitman stands beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of Willow Run's final assembly hangar, watching a seemingly endless line of completed P-51 Mustangs await flight testing and delivery to combat units. The sight never fails to inspire awe. 67 fighters completed this week alone, each aircraft representing the culmination of thousands of individual contributions from workers across America's industrial heartland. The production line operates with mechanical precision that transforms raw materials into instruments of aerial supremacy. The contrast with enemy manufacturing capabilities becomes more dramatic with each intelligence report from the Pacific Theater. While Willow Run alone produces more fighters monthly than Japan's entire aircraft industry, American production includes dozens of additional facilities manufacturing bombers, transports, trainers, and support equipment. The cumulative output represents industrial democracy's overwhelming response to totalitarian military challenge. Production statistics scroll across Sarah's consciousness like artillery bombardment. 15,175 total P-51s manufactured, 293 total aircraft completed since Pearl Harbor, 324,750 aircraft engines produced to power American and Allied air forces. Each number represents thousands of workers contributing specialized skills to collective defense efforts. Democracy proves its strength through distributed production capability that no centralized system can match or destroy. Sarah's supervisor, Mr. Patterson, approaches with the latest production reports and comparative analysis from intelligence sources. Japanese aircraft production peaked at 28,180 units during 1944, while American factories completed 9,618 fighters alone, excluding bombers, transports, and other categories. The 4-to-1 advantage in fighter production expands to 8-to-1 when including total aircraft manufacturing across all categories. Material abundance enables American production rates that Japanese planners consider impossible. Aluminum. Allocation for aircraft manufacturing exceeds total Japanese industrial capacity, while steel availability allows simultaneous expansion of shipbuilding, tank production, and artillery manufacturing. Natural resource advantages translate into weapons production that overwhelms enemy capabilities through sheer volume and technological sophistication. Training pipeline statistics reveal equally dramatic disparities in human resource development. American pilot training programs graduate 130,000 aviators annually while maintaining instruction hours that average 240 flight hours per student. Japanese programs produce fewer than 15,000 pilots yearly, with training reduced to 40 hours due to fuel shortages and accelerated schedules required by combat losses. Sarah examines the wing section she completed yesterday, now integrated into a fighter that will join combat squadrons within weeks. Her rivets secure not just aluminum panels, but American industrial philosophy applied to military production. Each connection embodies quality standards that prioritize reliability over speed, ensuring aircraft performance under combat conditions that demand absolute mechanical integrity. Quality control procedures at Willow Run exceed military specifications through corporate culture that emphasizes excellence over mere compliance. Rejection rates remain below 2%, while delivery schedules maintain consistency that enables strategic planning based on predictable equipment availability. Japanese production suffers from material shortages that compromise quality, while accelerated schedules reduce inspection time and manufacturing precision. Economic warfare conducted by American submarines creates cascading effects throughout Japanese industrial production. Fuel shortages limit aluminum smelting capacity, while rubber scarcity affects tire production and electrical insulation. Raw material constraints force Japanese factories to reduce output, while American plants expand production through unlimited access to domestic and international resources. Workforce demographics reveal additional American advantages in manufacturing capability and capacity. Women comprise 40% of aircraft production workers, effectively doubling available human resources, while men serve in combat units. Japanese industry lacks similar workforce flexibility due to cultural restrictions that limit women's participation in heavy manufacturing and technical occupations. Sarah reflects on President Roosevelt's Arsenal of Democracy speech, now vindicated through production statistics that exceed even optimistic projections. American factories produce weapons faster than military units can absorb them, while enemy forces struggle with equipment shortages that limit operational effectiveness. Industrial capacity becomes the decisive factor in modern warfare, more important than individual courage or tactical innovation. Radio broadcasts from the Pacific Theater describe systematic destruction of Japanese air power through sustained attrition that enemy production cannot replace. American commanders report kill ratios exceeding 10-1 while maintaining offensive pressure that prevents enemy recovery. The mathematical inevitability of American victory becomes apparent through simple arithmetic. Sustained high loss rates applied to irreplaceable resources. Advanced manufacturing techniques developed for aircraft production create spillover benefits that enhance American capability across multiple industries. Precision machining, quality control procedures, and production scheduling innovations transfer to tank manufacturing, shipbuilding, and electronics production. Industrial mobilization strengthens the entire economic foundation rather than depleting civilian capacity for military needs. As her shift concludes, Sarah observes the night crew assuming positions at workstations that operate continuously. Willow Run never sleeps. Production continues 24 hours daily, 7 days weekly, creating aircraft that carry American values across global distances. Each completed fighter represents democracy's commitment to ending totalitarian aggression through superior industrial capability applied to military objectives. Walking toward the parking lot, Sarah hears the sound of test flights overhead as newly completed Mustangs undergo acceptance trials before delivery to combat units. The aircraft will soon join squadrons operating from Pacific Islands, their aluminum wings carrying pieces of Michigan across oceanic distances to establish aerial supremacy above enemy territory. Red Dawson banks his P-51 Mustang into a gentle turn above the B-29 formation, his aircraft one of 68 fighters providing protective escort for today's mission to Tokyo. The site below represents American industrial capability transformed into aerial supremacy, 47 four-engine bombers flying in precise formation, while escort fighters weave protective patterns around their flanks. This coordinated display of air power would have been impossible without tactical innovations that revolutionized long-range operations. Fighter escort doctrine evolved rapidly from simple close protection to aggressive air superiority missions that clear enemy airspace before bombers arrive. Early escort missions kept fighters tethered to bomber formations, limiting tactical flexibility and allowing enemy interceptors to choose engagement conditions. Current doctrine sends fighters ahead to sweep airfields and destroy opposition on the ground, ensuring clear skies for subsequent bomber operations. The tactical transformation reflects broader strategic evolution as American forces shift from defensive operations to sustained offensive campaigns. Escort fighters no longer merely react to enemy attacks, but actively seek out and destroy Japanese air power at its source. P-51 Mustangs strafe airfields, attack training facilities, and intercept transport aircraft, carrying replacement pilots and equipment to operational units. Intelligence reports indicate that Japanese air defenses collapse under sustained pressure that exceeds their replacement capabilities. Fighter squadrons defending Tokyo operate at 20% strength, while pilot training programs graduate barely enough aviators to replace normal peacetime attrition rates. Combat losses create unsustainable personnel shortages that compound equipment deficits. Red monitors his fuel consumption carefully, balancing endurance requirements against performance needs during potential combat engagements. The external drop tanks carried during transit provide range extension that enables these deep penetration missions, while internal fuel reserves sustain combat operations and return flight. Fuel management determines mission success as much as pilot skill or aircraft performance. Radio transmissions coordinate the escort formation's disposition around bomber elements, ensuring overlapping coverage that prevents enemy penetration. Fighter tactics emphasize mutual support and concentrated firepower rather than individual heroics, reflecting lessons learned through 3 years of Pacific combat. Disciplined formations defeat scattered opposition through superior coordination and overwhelming local superiority. Below the formation, Tokyo Bay stretches toward the horizon, while the city itself sprawls across the landscape in defiance of previous bombing campaigns. The target represents Japan's industrial and political heart. Attacking it with escorted daylight raids demonstrates American capability to strike anywhere within the enemy empire. Psychological impact equals physical destruction, as civilian morale collapses under evidence of complete air superiority. Japanese interceptors appear sporadically, individual fighters or small formations attempting desperate attacks against overwhelming odds. The site emphasizes enemy air power's degradation from coordinated defensive operations to scattered resistance by undertrained pilots flying maintenance-deferred aircraft. Systematic attrition has reduced Japanese capability below effective operational thresholds. Enemy pilots demonstrate courage despite hopeless tactical situations, attacking bomber formations with determination that commands respect, even from opponents. But courage alone cannot overcome technological and numerical disadvantages that favor American forces by margins approaching 10-1 in some engagements. Industrial capacity determines combat outcomes more decisively than individual heroism or tactical innovation. The bombers begin their attack runs, while escort fighters maintain protective screens and engage scattered opposition. Bomb bay doors open to reveal ordnance loads that represent American industrial production, translated into destructive capability. Each 500-pound general-purpose bomb embodies tons of steel, thousands of pounds of explosives, and hundreds of hours of manufacturing labor focused on ending enemy resistance. Secondary explosions erupt across Tokyo as bombs find targets among industrial facilities and transportation networks. The destruction creates cascading effects that multiply direct damage through disruption of production schedules, supply chains, and infrastructure systems. Strategic bombing attacks Japanese capability to wage war rather than merely inflicting tactical damage on military units. Red watches Japanese fighters attempt ineffective intercepts, their attacks disrupted by escort formations that respond with concentrated firepower and superior aircraft performance. The mathematical inevitability of American victory becomes apparent through sustained operations that enemy forces cannot counter effectively. Air superiority enables subsequent operations that expand American advantages exponentially. Mustang pilots report successful strafing attacks on airfields throughout the Tokyo region, destroying aircraft on the ground before they can reach operational altitude. These preventive strikes eliminate potential opposition while conserving ammunition for more valuable targets. Tactical innovation transforms escort fighters from defensive guardians into offensive weapons that that achieve air supremacy through systematic destruction. As the mission concludes and formations turn toward Iwo Jima, Red calculates fuel consumption and confirms adequate reserves for return flight. The routine nature of these calculations reflects operational maturity that enables sustained campaigns across previously impossible distances. American logistics capabilities support tactical innovations that render geographic barriers irrelevant to strategic planning. The formation's departure from Tokyo airspace proceeds without significant opposition, demonstrating complete American air superiority over Japan's most heavily defended territory. Enemy fighters lack fuel reserves for extended pursuit, while anti-aircraft defenses prove ineffective against formations operating at optimal altitude and speed. The sky belongs entirely to American forces operating with apparent immunity from effective countermeasures. Yuki Sato crouches in the concrete air raid shelter beneath her Tokyo school, pressing her hands against her ears as incendiary bombs ignite a firestorm that transforms night into artificial day. The B-29 super fortresses overhead drop clusters of magnesium-filled cylinders that create temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel and ignite anything combustible within vast areas of the city. The sound penetrates the shelter like thunder that never ends. Through shelter vents, Yuki glimpses orange light flickering across the walls, reflections of the inferno consuming Tokyo. On March 9-10, 1945, the firebombing raid kills about 100,000 civilians in one night, leveling 16 square miles. The psychological shock rivals the destruction itself. Months of raids had left civilians clinging to faith in air defenses, but the arrival of American escort fighters proves no part of Japan is safe. Above the firestorm, P-51 Mustangs circle, while B-29s bomb with precision. Escorts cut down Japanese interceptors before they can threaten the bombers. With air superiority secure, American forces strike without fear of counterattack. Railways stop after strafing, power plants fall, and firefighting collapses as water mains rupture and fire brigades lose men and equipment. Civilian morale crumbles as radio broadcasts admit Japan cannot resist for lack of fuel and aircraft. At dawn, Yuki emerges into ruins, her neighborhood reduced to foundations and ash. Refugees wander through devastation, searching for family. Hospitals overflow with burn victims, pharmaceuticals are scarce, and food distribution fails as transport networks collapse under bombing and strafing. The humanitarian disaster compounds the military effect. American doctrine targets morale as much as factories, using attrition that Japan cannot match. By mid-1945, production statistics confirm collapse. Japanese output falls below 10% of peak. Aircraft factories shut down, shipyards close, and raw materials vanish under submarine blockade. In a briefing room, charts dwarf human comprehension. Colonel James Mitchell tells officers, "Gentlemen, our factories build more planes in a month than Japan in a year. They train 15,000 pilots with 40 hours each. We graduate 130,000 with 240 hours. Fuel disparities are even greater, 5 billion gallons for the U.S. in 1944 against Japan's dwindling 500 million hours. Unlimited spare parts and quality control sustain American squadrons, while Japanese units cannibalize wrecks. Women in U.S. factories double capacity, while Japan restricts female labor. Red Dawson reflects, every fight favors us. Their courage can't overcome shortages. We fly full fuel loads. They can serve just to get home. Predictable production lets commanders plan knowing losses will be replaced within weeks. American industry makes attrition sustainable. Japanese losses are irreplaceable. Decades later, Red stands beside a restored P-51D Mustang in the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. The plane symbolizes not just technology, but democracy's industrial triumph. Visitors listen as he recalls escorting bombers 1,500 miles over Tokyo and meeting Japanese pilots who fought bravely despite hopeless odds. Engineering students marvel at innovations like drop tanks that gave the Mustang range. Sarah Whitman, once a factory worker, recalls riveting wings through 12-hour shifts. Yuki Sato, who emigrated to California, remembers the helplessness of civilians under contrails stretching across Tokyo's skies. Museum displays list production numbers: 15,175 Mustangs, nearly 300,000 U.S. aircraft overall, each figure a monument to collective effort. Even today, surviving Mustangs fetch millions, still flown at air shows. As Red finishes his visit, he touches the polished aluminum. For him, the Mustang embodies when American democracy proved itself through industry and innovation, steel and aluminum transformed into instruments of liberation, carrying freedom across oceans to victory over tyranny. If you enjoyed the story I hand, pick this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.